This recording, or parts thereof, may not be reproduced without permission of Dialogue House Associates. All rights reserved. The following presentation, Active Methods of Spiritual Growth, is a lecture demonstration by Dr. Ira Progoff, given at the California Institute of Asian Studies in February 1974. Dr. Progoff is introduced by Dr. Haridas Chaudhry, Director of the Institute.
When I first read his book, Depth Psychology and Modern Man, I had the joy of a great discovery, because I found that here was a psychologist, a leading psychologist, who had not only very extensive knowledge of human psychology, but also profound spiritual insight and the dynamics of spiritual self-unfoldment. So we are really very happy that he could come. I know he had been waiting for quite a while. We are glad to see also that he has brought with him very lovely weather, beautiful sunshine. A new dimension of light and sunshine will be added to your life after he gives his talk and gives a demonstration of the process meditation which he has invented. I believe this process meditation is not only in harmony with new development in modern philosophical thinking, which has replaced static metaphysical thinking by evolutionary perspective of life. So first of all, I'm trying to make this point that his process meditation technique is in harmony with new development in modern philosophical thinking, and is also a very effective means to balanced personality growth and dynamic self-realization. I emphasize the expression dynamic self-realization. You know, Sri Aurobindo, the great dynamic spiritual leader of modern India, has repeatedly made the distinction between static self-realization and dynamic self-realization. And after you hear Dr. Progoff, I think that this distinction will be made abundantly clear to all of you. So, without saying any more, I shall now request Dr. Progoff to begin.
I'm surprised to learn that I brought good weather to California, because I assumed that it was always here. But I suppose that's the nature of truth, that we begin with it and it's always present. It's just a question of making it accessible and real to us. All of the work that I spent the last 20 years doing has been moving toward what seems to me to be the meaning of the work that takes place here. That is, to understand the integral connection between what the West has called psychology and what is the unfoldment and development of the inner life. That book of mine, The Depth Psychology and Modern Man, was, when it was published, hardly noticed. So I don't wonder that you thought that kind of thing didn't exist. But what it was trying to say, and what the feeling was then, that was not heard at that time, but is now being part of our time and is really being embodied in places like this, was my sense that what the Western man had been speaking of as illness and had been treating in a medical model had actually to be understood as part of the process of development of the human person, and that the nature of the human being is such that he has the necessity of making connection with the seed of the spiritual possibility in his life, and that if he does not do this, or if he is distracted from doing this, he will become ill for the lack of doing it. So that the choice was really not a choice at all. It was not go by a medical pathological route in psychology or go by a spiritual route. It was really that for the lack of a spiritual route, one would be cast into the situation of pathology. And coming from that, it then seemed to me that what was clear was that the meaning of psychology, especially of depth psychology, in history, was that it had to provide a means, a kind of bridge, by which the modern person could understand that the great lack in Western civilization and in the history of Western religions is that the Western religions had not so far provided a really usable method of spiritual development, and that for the lack of that, Western man was ill because he had no way of really developing his inner capacities. So that it came for me then that what psychotherapy had to be was not really a psychotherapy in a medical model. It had to find the means and the processes to enable the individual person to make contact with the depth within himself and in a systematic way to be able to draw that forth to whatever would be the unfolding, even the infinite levels of unfoldment that would be possible to him. So that meant to me that the connection of psychology and spirit was one, and that finally we had to have a way, a method that would come from psychology and would become the equivalent of what have been ways of spiritual discipline in other cultures, notably in the Eastern culture. That book was really the base for me. Essentially, the depth of man must be understood not as containing primarily what Freud had understood as the repressed, that is, Freud's idea of the repressed as the depth or unconscious, and what Jung had spoken of as the personal unconscious, but that we could understand the unconscious as containing as a seed the potential that was unconscious, not because it had been lived and pressed back, but because it had not yet been lived. That what is unconscious in us is therefore present as potential, and that what is contained in these depths is a great power, must be a great power, just because it follows the metaphor that we see in nature, that the tree is contained in its seed, in its acorn, and there must be a great energy and a great power present for so much that is potential to be contained in something that is so small. That means also that if we would find a means of drawing from the seed that which is potential in it, we cannot go by the way of analysis, because analysis is to cut up, to break apart, and the seed will never become the tree if it is cut up, but it can only become the tree if it is nurtured, if it is worked with, if it is evoked. Therefore, the key for me has become a psychology of evoking rather than a psychoanalysis. Now, the evoking of the person must be done in a very real and realistic way, because what is involved in evoking a person, it's not just an excitation of the individual, but it must be that one is drawing forth truly nurturing what a person's life is. And it would be this, that the heart of what it is to be an individual is always shown in the continuity of the life. Hermann Hesse says it, I think, in Demian, that he says each person is a unique combination of events. Never before and never again in history will this unique combination come together in just the form that it comes together in this individual person. Therefore, when I consider what is it really, when we think of what it is to be a person, how shall we look for what it is to be a person? Or if I think in terms of dialogue, which has become a very important term to me, what shall the dialogue really be between? If the dialogue is between me as a person and another as a person, what is that dialogue between? Now, it seems to me that the essence of a person is the special and unique continuity by which the seed of a being has had a history and has unfolded and has come finally to a further place which is still on the way to its continuing. That is, the process of a life history that goes from a seed, which is a potential, through a series of events, which, that is to say, each time one has lived an event that was part of the potential, that event has become the past, and still one is moving through this present into a future. That unique succession of life history unfolding and forming and moving on, that unique succession, the essence of that is the person. When we go then, as we have many exercises in our work in Dialogue House, when we go to establish dialogue, that dialogue must be between the essence, so to say, the person within the process of each individual life, the person within the process in the continuity and movement of my life, meeting with the person that is in the process, moving and unfolding in the other's life.